The next interview moves diagonally across London to Shepperton, and the home of another unparalleled and subversive giant of contemporary English literature, the late JG Ballard. Listening to this compelling, sometimes disturbing conversation again, I'm immediately transported back to the moment we found his shabby, rather rubbish-strewn suburban front door, with the passenger aircraft coming in and out of Heathrow thundering just above our heads, like some semi-apocalyptic techno-disaster from one of Ballard's novels, just waiting to happen. The man came to the door looking like he usually does, a disgraced down-at-heel accountant, but embraced us with a huge amount of whiskey and soda-driven bonhomie. We picked our way through the cluttered flat to his front room, which was normally decorated, apart from the huge and sexually explicit surrealist painting just above the mantelpiece. And then, whiskey and sodas in hand, we began to tackle his enormous literary achievement. Mind-bending fictions like Crash, The Atrocity Exhibition and The Drowned World, which frighten us with images of technology, violence and sexuality, fused into horrific but prophetic combinations. His fictionalised memoirs, Empire of the Sun and The Kindness of Women, the former turned into a powerful movie by Steven Spielberg, and on his general musings on the techno-psychological weirdness of the 20th century, where our own inventions and innovations come to haunt our dreams and exploit our erotic energies, offering paradise on earth, but always threatening a wasteland of junk and destruction underneath. I also have to commend the startling production of this programme by Ian Docherty. At times, in its use of sound and quotations, itself approaching a work of radio art. If you're listening at bedtime, I suggest you pull the duvet right up over your head and stay there for the next 50 minutes. It's going to be a long, strange trip. Here's JG Ballard. Welcome. There are two writers called JG Ballard. One overground and popular, and one very underground indeed. Ballard's best-selling 1984 novel, Empire of the Sun, has been acclaimed as a classic of post-war British autobiography, a memoir of his days as an abandoned child in a Shanghai prisoner of war camp during World War II. It also provided the script for one of Steven Spielberg's better blockbusters. Yet the Ballard of the preceding 3 decades is a much less mainstream creature. This Ballard is the violent futurist of English letters, mixing dark surrealism and glittering technology, and coming up with extreme tales of sex and brutality that still shock to this day. His most notorious 1972 novel, Crash, which takes as its premise that car crashes are sexually exciting, is about to be released as a movie by David Cronenberg, who previously filmed or attempted to film William Burroughs' novel The Naked Lunch. The imagination runs wild. Ballard has a new book of essays out, immodestly titled A User's Guide to the Millennium. And if anyone can provide some directions out of the century of Hiroshima and Dealey Plaza, Marilyn Monroe and Rosemary West, then it's James Graham Ballard. I met him at his cosy suburban semi in Shepperton, and we began with Empire of the Sun. JG Ballard, you've written an extraordinary range and style of works over the years, but the book and the film which most people will know you for is Empire of the Sun, which was a conventional memoir of your childhood experiences in Shanghai during the Second World War. Did you have any idea that that particular book would make such an impact?
Not while I was writing it, no. I mean, I was absolutely amazed by the reception of the book when it was published. People say, of course, it's very different from everything else you've written. But to me, it wasn't. I mean, it was semi-autobiographical in the way that my earlier novels weren't. But it was basically a book, an imaginative response to the subject matter, in the way that all my novels have been. Of course, it was a very important book for me because not because it was successful, though that was a very pleasant thing to happen to any novelist, but it opened sort of windows that, in my mind, that had been closed for 40 years. I mean, it was a very, very long time to wait, something like 40 years before, I wrote about my wartime experiences. I never understood to this day why I, waited so long. And of course I realized, once I'd written Empire of the Sun, I realized that there were traces of my wartime experiences present, though I'd never realized it, in all my earlier novels, that that for some reason I'd suppressed my memories of the war, but they'd nonetheless come through the paving stones I'd laid down. And once I'd written Empire of the Sun, I suddenly realized, my God, of course, I can see in the Drowned World and the Crystal World and Crash and High Rise and so on, I can see, and in all my short stories, I can see my past like a kind of almost invisible guest at a party. And when I wrote Empire of the Sun, I held that guest in my hands and recognized him as my younger self.
From Empire of the Sun by JG Ballard. Jim had tried to tell his mother about his dreams, but like all the adults in Shanghai that winter of 1941, she was too preoccupied to listen to him. Perhaps she had bad dreams of her own. In an eerie way, these shuffled images of tanks and dive bombers were completely silent, as if his sleeping mind was trying to separate the real war from the make-believe conflicts invented by Pathé and British movie tone. Jim had no doubt which was real. The real war was everything he had seen for himself since the Japanese invasion of China in 1937. The old battlegrounds at Hungzhou and Lunghua, where the bones of the unburied dead rose to the surface of the paddy fields each spring. Real war was the thousands of Chinese refugees dying of cholera in the sealed stockades at Hutang, and the bloody heads of communist soldiers mounted in pikes along the Bund. In a real war, no one knew which side he was on, and there were no flags or commentators or winners. In a real war, there were no enemies.
So you went back to Shanghai. These are always strange experiences when, you go back to a great moment that shaped you at a very vulnerable age. Briefly, what was that like?
I went back to Shanghai for the first time in 1991 with a BBC TV film crew, and I was there for about a week. We revisited the house where I lived and then the camp, and actually filmed inside the very room that I shared with my parents and my sister. That was an extraordinary experience, of course. Shanghai, the house I lived in and the camp were all exactly as I remembered them, because I was nervous of going, in a way, because I thought they're likely to be nothing like my memories, in which case I'd been living with a complete, a complete myth. But in fact, they were there, like a sort of intact stage set. I think what was missing was my own emotions, my own memories, in a way, were too accurate. I hadn't the sort of unresolved emotions that I still feel when I visit, say, very occasionally visit Cambridge University, which I disliked intensely. And I know that my dislike of Cambridge University has never really been resolved. So whenever I briefly pass Cambridge or drive through it, I feel a kind of, the gears of my hostility grinding together. Now, that didn't happen in Shanghai, because there were no unresolved emotions. It was as if I'd only been away a day. It wasn't a sort of pregnant homecoming which released a huge flood of sort of anguished material. It was as if I'd dropped by after a quick trip down to Hong Kong. But it was a very moving experience, all the same.
Honestly, what do you think that experience did to you?